My grandmother always tells me that after 67 they felt relieved, in the sense that there was a cultural suffocation that was gone. Because suddenly you can go to cities like Jenin and buy cloth, just the way you did 19 years before or 17 years before in Baghdad.
And we try to erase whatever we can that we got from them, because we all spoke Hebrew with Arab accent, and it's never considered intelligent. In Israel, you to this day, you will not see anybody, in the broadcast media with Yemenite accent or Moroccan accent.
So according to my American passport, I'm just a Moroccan living in America. There's no mentioning of Israel or anything. So the guy said, the officer, when I walked in, he smiled at me and he said, in Moroccan dialect, he says, "Marhaba bik fi bladik," welcome in your homeland.
And my book is titled Israeli Media and the Framing of Internal Conflict, the Yemenite Babies Affair, and it was published in 2009, just a year ago, by Palgrave Macmillan. Well, goodbye my close circle of Mizrahi scholars, all of which are working here in the United States. So it's definitely, it's not a coincidence that I had to publish it in English in here, and I had to come to study here. I just know from a woman who was trying to get her PhD in history about this affair, and she was denied from both Bar Ilan University and Hebrew University. So the blocking of the information is done on very different levels, and the silencing of these narratives. So when right after the book was published, I went to Israel that following December. I got some press. I had an interview on TV. I had an interview on the radio, but it was kind of in more alternative outlets, shall we say. I think there is a review supposed to come out shortly in the Journal of Holy Land Studies, and that's from the UK. I tried to publish an article about it, and that's an interesting story, in Tikkun magazine. You know that it's considered lefty here in the US, and they rejected me, which was interesting, and that's part of the problem that Mizrahi intellectuals here in the US have with the Israeli left, is that there's sort of a double standard that's applied, that they would do things and publish things about the Palestinian issue, but not about the Mizrahi oppression. And a lot of us feel, and me too, that it's just, I'm not interested in this kind of a conversation that just looks at one oppression, and they're not talking about both things because they are linked. So if there is any hope for any change, I think for any kind of peace, there's like one of the Black Panthers activists that Sami actually interviewed in his film. He said there will never be peace with Gaza before there is a peace in Sderot. So there must be that kind of talk simultaneously, and unfortunately in Israel it's still very much denial and rejection of these narratives. How is it that an organization like Human Rights Watch will not do anything about stealing of babies or other ways that Mizrahim are being discriminated on a daily basis in Israel? And I know this for a fact, that activists on the education front, on all kinds of fronts have requested help from human rights organization, and they told me that the cold shoulder that we got from them was chilling. So it's really a problem, and I think that part of it, at least, is that even if they care, let's assume that they care, that the Palestinian issue, the way it's going to be resolved, eventually there will be a state. There will be a Palestinian state, and then it's not going to be our problem. So it's not, this issue is not as threatening as the Mizrahi issue. Even with the Mizrahi issue, we're not talking about that. I mean, we are talking about land also economically, and then we're talking about divisions of land. But, you know, because when we start to discuss the Mizrahi-Ashkenazi conflict, we want things, okay, to make it better, to make it right. So we want affirmative action. We want our narratives to be in the history books. So our acknowledgement has a price, and that price might mean, you know, somebody has to step down so that we can get in, and they're not going to give up this place. So people in power are not going to give up their power on their own. That's not going to happen. And that's, you know, and I feel that there is, again, that's a result of ignorance. There is this tension and fear that Mizrahim are going to change the culture, that we need, you know, that Israel is not going to, Israel is going to lose its white Western image, and that's a threat to Ashkenazim. We're dirtying the cultural atmosphere for them, and that's a problem. You know that, by the way, the Black Panthers, they were meeting with the PLO representatives back, I think, in 71 or 72, and they were arrested. They were deemed terrorists. They were demonized in a way that, you know, when you talk to these activists today, they're saying, why? Is that white privilege only? When they were told, don't do that, don't talk to them. And he said, back then we understood. And we understood, they understood not because they were studying in a university. It's like Sami said, some of them were not even third grade graduates. They understood it from their gut, that you know, what Martin Luther King said, that injustice anywhere it's a threat to justice everywhere. They understood that the two struggles are intertwined, that they cannot be separated, that it will never be good for Mizrahim to oppress other people. That's not what we meant to do. And also that culturally we are supposed to be the bridge to peace. How is it that we're all of a sudden perceived as the obstacle? So, and the problem is that with any struggle, until there is going to be a political implications, is, you know, how you're going to divide the cake. In the end, that's the bottom line. So we can talk all we want, but if the Mizrahim are not going to get budget, it's like with the, you know, with the Palestinian cause. So we need someone in the government that would actually make peace and not object to even stop settlement in territories while we're talking, which is, it's so ridiculous. There's not even a way to begin to explain how ridiculous this is.
I left about 9 years ago, and for many reasons. The main trigger was that my older son was reaching the age of being enlisted in the army, drafted. So we didn't want him to serve in the army. So we had to make the choice, and there were other reasons. Work, making, you know, a living is very tough in Israel. For any Israeli with a PhD, it's very tough because there are like 5 universities in Israel and some colleges. And if you want to be in a university with the research activity and etc., it's 5 universities. So, and there are many Israeli PhDs. So maybe out of every 10 PhDs, I think 7 have no place, they have to leave. But my case is even worse, as being politically involved and outspoken, with critical views, publications of the government, of Zionism, etc. And being Mizrahi also, being you know, Moroccan Jew from the Middle East, in Israel, you start with no, even if you have the education, you have no connections, and you're not in the network, you're not among the, you don't have an uncle, a cousin, a neighbor, a friend from the army, that really can help you get into this very closed academic club in Israel. Very few people. The filter is Zionism. I mean, if you make it through that filter, you can be there. But then again, it's not enough. You need to belong. It's a club. You need to be a member. You need to be a son of a member, a daughter of a member, or a nephew or niece, whatever. And so it's tough if you want to make a good living and have a better future for your kids. In my situation, it's better to leave, although I would stay for political reasons, because I'm involved and I want to be involved. If you are devoted to your political life activities on the expense of being responsible to your children, your wife, their livelihood, etc., it's going to fall apart. I mean, divorce, losing, you know, it's very simple. It happens to many activists. The first wave in 1950, 51, 52. Yeah.
What happened exactly?
What happened was very simple. The Americans were testing new, like they do in Africa today, like they do everywhere. Like all, you know, Africa and then the colonial world was a big laboratory of experiments of big pharmaceutical companies and medical equipment companies. They said, well, you know, they presented as a good deed, you know, goodwill. Will give you the equipment, will give you the medicine, but it's not. They're killing thousands of people because they're experimenting on them. They do it today. We know that with the AIDS, with everything. It's just experiments after experiments. So it was the same. The Americans were looking, you know, I forgot the name of the company who made this X-ray machines, strong X-ray machines, and they gave actually it was Professor Shiba in the Ministry of Health in Israel. They gave the Israeli government a big grant and the X-ray machines to try this new treatment of treating the ringworm disease that affects the head, you know, under the hair, and the hair falls, and of course. So they chose, you know, people who were helpless. The parents, you know, did not know, and they had the disease. You know, there were other treatments available, but this was a new one, and it was an experiment. That's it. That's the bottom line. So they experimented on hundreds, maybe thousands of children, young children, not adults. It's interesting. Young children with very strong exposure to X-ray waves, and you know, most of these people got cancer at one point of their lives. Many died, and many are still sick. Suffering from cancer, different skin cancer and brain cancer and stuff like that. So it was an experiment. The government would not admit that it was an experiment, but they agreed to compensate the families without admitting to any wrongdoing, of course. Well, the experiment failed. The treatment is not available anymore. No one is using Röntgen or X-ray for ringworms anymore. So it was like they were treating. This proves what we talk about the Orientalist, colonialist characteristic of Zionism, because they were treating these people exactly as the Europeans, the Americans were treating people in Africa and Asia. Exactly the same, just, you know, cheap labor, you know, exploit them and experiment on them. That's exactly how they treated these people. The only difference, they allowed them to become citizens, of course, serving the army and enjoy the privileges that Palestinians did not enjoy. Some of the privileges, you know, that Palestinians, of course, were not able to enjoy as full citizens. So they felt, you know, grateful. That's why you don't see much protest anymore.
Well, the thing is that living in Jerusalem in the 70s mostly. I mean, I was born in 66, but you know, my upbringing was mostly in the 70s as I was growing up. I lived in a neighborhood that was predominantly Iraqi. I mean, one half is Moroccan, another half is Iraqi, and many of my uncles married Moroccan women. So I'm familiar actually with two cultures. And we had in my class 13 kids who were all from Iraqi families. So that was really nice, particularly in Arabic classes, because we would sit in Arabic classes and we would compare words. I had a friend from Basra, and he used to compare words in the class. His aunt was the teacher teaching Arabic. So stuff like this was going on all the time. In Jerusalem at the time, I mean, because of the way that Jerusalem is structured, you live in neighborhoods that are almost homogeneous ethnically. I mean, you have 3 or 4 blocks, and in many cases, everybody is a relative. It's like where we were growing up, I had five or 6 aunts and uncles with their children, and that was very, very common. And so there was mostly issues of generations rather than, you know, it was mostly generational issues rather where you come from. You know, it's more like whose generation is what and so on. And at school we were, it was very much like, you know, pretty much half the class were Moroccan, half the class were Iraqis. When I went to high school, it was all different, because when I went to high school, I went to a different neighborhood. Mama. I'm sorry. And at high school, this all changed, because about, I would say, 95% of the kids were coming from European background, mostly middle and upper classes and not working classes. And there were very few of us who were brought to this school as a kind of a token, you know, from the slums. And there were several movies done on this particular high school, and I have several friends who are all Iraqis from all over Israel, who all were trained in this school. So some of them also Moroccans, with the same experience of like this huge change, moving from a school that is mostly, you know, either Moroccan or Iraqi, and then moving to something that is completely different. There it was a different world. There it was a different Jerusalem and a different Israel as well. I think the victory of 67, or the Arab defeat of 67, was the first time that Arab Jews experienced a war with the Arab world as Israelis. Because my parents and my grandmother tells me about the 48 war, which she experienced as an Iraqi person. Now there, I mean, the most concern was that they were not going to be accused for spying for Israel, okay? And they were not aware of the fact that they were going to emigrate to Israel. They were thinking they're just going to stay there and the situation is going to go bad because they are Jews and there's an enmity between Iraq and the new Jewish state. Now they live in 51, and of course there was the 56 war, but it was very limited in terms of its impact on Israelis. But in 67, it is the same people who experienced the 48 war as Iraqis, they now experience a new Arab-Israeli war as Israelis. And I think it did something to the Arab-Jewish psyche, something bad, not good. That suddenly, you know, the people whom you saw as neighbors, but also the members of the majority in a society that was basically oppressive, yeah, suddenly they are the ones who are defeated. And I think the support, one of the reasons, people don't talk about it a lot, I mean, and it's just a suggestion that I have, a wild suggestion. I think one of the reasons that there is a support for the right, the moderate right in Israel on the part of Arab Jews, is the fact, is the impact of that, you know. We suddenly feel, we really switch sides. And we want to make sure that no one pushes us back to the other side. Yes. At the same time, you know, suddenly there's a whole Arab land that you can go to. That's the West Bank. Now that challenges your identity again, because what are you doing there? You know, every time that you go to the eastern part of Jerusalem, you're an Arab again. This is how you're treated. Yeah. When you go back to the western side of Jerusalem, you have to reaffirm the fact that to be Jew means to be a victorious Israeli or a triumphant Israeli, as opposed to a defeated Arab. There are many, many reasons. People talk about the discrimination, and people talk about the ethnic divisions in Israel. All this is true. But if we really want to take seriously the fact that Arab Jews, or in this case Iraqi Jews, are Arabs, yes, then we have to ask what it really means that these people moved in 51 to Israel, changed their identity, and then experienced a complete victory, in the sense that it was a total naksa, you know, to see their own brothers, quote unquote, or older brothers, you know, suddenly defeated, people whom they had to treat, you know, with a certain respect because they were the majority.
Next on The Other Arabs.
My name in Arabic is Hikmat Nassim Rabia, and my name in Hebrew is David Rabi, which was changed recently to Rabia. I was born in Baghdad, Iraq, in the year 1938. I completed my BA in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem in Literature and History, MA in Semitic Languages, and PhD in Arabic from Druz University in Philadelphia.
I was born in Brooklyn in 1961 to a couple of mixed Sephardic lineage. My mother is of Syrian lineage, my father is of Iraqi lineage. My father left the home when I was very, very young, and I was raised by my mother.
وسلبوني عينك يا بنت بلدي وسلبوني عينك والزين اللي فيك قلبي كيبغيك والزين اللي فيك قلبي كيبغيك اي يا بنت بلدي
تنشيد الصوبين كرفور الصافن إلا خذ قلبي